Hey, Pro Life Jen, and welcome back to the Kristen Hawkins Show. In today's episode, I'm going to be discussing IVF, vitro fertilization. Yep, I said it, and we need to talk about it. And surprise, surprise, the establishment media are now misleading on a new infant mortality analysis and lying about pro-life laws. So I'm going to set the record straight. We also need to talk about President Trump's nominee for the Department of Labor and why she's a bad choice. And we need to talk about the established media, how they're actually doing something good when they're exposing, and they've just started exposing how horrible Planned Parenthood is. And I am so here for it. So we have a lot to talk about, so let's jump right in. So President Trump just recently signed an executive order on IVF. What did it say? And let's talk about how it's at odds with fundamental pro-life principles. So on February 18th, President Trump signed an executive order which aims to, quote, expand access to IVF and reduce the cost of IVF. It directs his administration to develop policy recommendations within 90 days to achieve those two goals. The EO acknowledges that family foundation is important, but it incorrectly pegs the cost of IVF as one of the main barriers to family formation. First, let's just be very clear. Family formation is important. Family is the most important unit in our society, in our world today. At the same time, while infertility can be extremely heavy cost for families to bear, adults do not have a right to biological children. I'm going to say this again. You do not have a right to biological children. And I know this is hard to hear. That's why I said it again, especially if you've been longing for a child on your own and cannot conceive naturally. This is important. Being a parent is a privilege. It's an honor. It's a responsibility, but it's not your fundamental right. Because if it's your fundamental right, that means you can do whatever you want, or you think you can do whatever you want to achieve that goal. And adults certainly don't have the right to create designer babies, which are an offering, they're a product of IVF that we don't talk about nearly enough. Although there's a bunch of Hollywood starlets that try to brag about. I'm going to dig into that in a little bit. Rather, children, this is fundamental, children have a right to be born to a biological mother and a father and are entitled to ultimate protection by their parents, which actually rules out the use of IVF. Once again, I gotta get into it a little bit later. First, let's do a little IVF 101. IVF involves creating human lives outside of the sexual act. Eggs from mom, sperm from dad are taken from mom and dad and joined by a scientist in a lab under a microscope. Why is that problematic? Isn't creating new humans a kind of good thing we celebrate in the pro-life movement? Creating new humans is, but not how these humans are being created. According to the National Catholic Bioethics Center, which provides free bioethics resources and is probably the most reliable bioethics think tank in the pro-life movement, IVF includes at least two, quote, major moral problems: the collateral damage problem and the intrinsic problem. Virtually the entire pro-life movement, regardless of religious background, agrees that collateral damage is a core problem with IVF. The Catholic Bioethics Center explains, quote, collateral damage problems mean that in order to achieve one IVF birth, clinic workers may create a dozen embryos, pre-screen and transfer several of the best ones, discard or freeze the leftovers, and if more than one implants, selectively abort the additional fetuses. The high tolerance for collateral damage in IVF clinics and among IVF customers arises out of the intentional prioritization of the desires of the older, more powerful, and wealthy over the rights and needs of the voiceless embryonic children. Parental wants are always assumed by the industry to trump the child's best interests, allowing for grave human rights violations to become standards of fertility care. In other words, IVF creates a subclass of humans who can be exploited, used, and discarded at the whims of adults. And boy, are they discarded and killed. According to the Journal of Assisted Reproduction Genetics, now this is a low estimate. I have seen higher estimates, but this is a reputable journal, so I wanted to go with this number. Approximately 76.5% of human embryos transferred in the IVF cycles do not lead to a live birth. That means 1 out of every 4 babies created in the IVF process, only 1 at most will be born. This is a classic case of the ends don't justify the means. Every baby is a miracle and a gift, but the desire to have a biological child does not justify killing or discarding or risking the lives of the majority of your children who will also be created in that process. Catholic News Agency puts it another way. They said, quote, the CDC estimates that more than 238,000 patients attempted IVF in 2021. If clinics created between 7 and 8 embryos for every patient, that's kind of industry average, that would yield 1.6 million to 1.9 million over a year. Despite these high numbers, fewer than 100,000 embryos, humans, were brought to term, which suggests that somewhere between 1.5 million and 1.8 million embryos created through IVF were never born. In other words, IVF kills more children than abortion in the United States of America. I also want to take a note. Every time you read a news article about this, they often say embryos. I would encourage you not to say it that way. And I've been trying to catch myself and our team at Students for Life to stop saying that, because we use today, and we don't intend this, but those who advocate for destruction of human life in the womb via abortion and now IVF often will use the word embryo as if the embryo, the human, is different than us. And so we use it more as a dehumanizing term. That's why you hear the abortion lobby say the word fetus. They don't want to say young one, or the actual Latin word, the translation, because they want to say fetus. It's just a fetus. They don't want to say a baby or a child, because that humanizes what they're saying they want to do, which is kill a human child, right? And so I think we kind of get tripped up sometimes in language. We keep saying embryos. And like I said, I even quoted Catholic articles that say this. I have been challenging myself to say humans in embryonic form, in the embryonic stage, or embryonic children, because we need to make sure we're not playing their game and unintentionally dehumanizing these children. So just, side note, caveat to that. There's also, so even for children who then are created, are selected as good enough to be implanted, okay? There's also a high rate of miscarriage once the humans are inserted into the mother's uterus or the surrogate's uterus. Typically, multiple embryos are actually inserted into a mother, implanted in hopes that at least just one will take. But if more humans in embryonic form, I had to trip myself up. If more humans in embryonic form survive and turn into humans in the fetal form, IVF then lets the parents decide how many they want to keep, and then discourages them from carrying large sets of multiples. So it's called selective reduction, meaning an abortion of a twin or a triplet. This is sick. They don't call abortion and call it selective reduction. I've even heard some IVF groups tell mothers or want mothers to sign in advance that if they get pregnant with multiples, they will use selective reduction. It is sick, absolutely sick. A huge, and you might remember this, national debate about IVF started a year ago. So right as the campaign was really starting to heat up, because the Alabama Supreme Court ruled in an 8-1 decision that humans in embryonic form stored in IVF clinics are, quote, extrauterine children. Remember, that was a case because a couple had conceived children via IVF, and then the IVF clinic didn't have good standards, surprise, because there's no monitoring of IVF clinics. It's like the Wild Wild West. It's like abortion facilities. So like this rando guy walked into the creation room and killed their children. And so they sued because they said, these are our children. And so the Supreme Court of Alabama said, yep, you're right. These were children. And then all this chaos ensued, and Donald Trump was like, oh, I'm pro IVF. And then all these Republicans in Congress who have like pro life voting records were like, we're pro IVF. The Republicans are pro IVF. They were like terrified that this was going to be like an issue they'd lose the election over. They were wrong. And the Republicans had a massive opportunity last winter to take a stand and to show all of Americans that we really believe when we say human life begins at conception, every human life is valuable. It was clear that the Alabama Supreme Court was just obviously acknowledging scientific fact that human embryos are in fact children who are just living outside the womb. Their location is different, but not who they are. As such, the Supreme Court then said that Alabama's wrongful death of a minor law applied. But shortly after the ruling, the GOP legislature in the Alabama Capitol passed a bill saying, oh, don't worry, we're going to do retroactive immunity to all those involved in IVF. And even this dude who destroyed these couples' children, nothing's going to happen to him. All in the name of protecting access to IVF and not wanting to potentially lose an election because they would actually have to say something that some people would not be ready to hear. Because the reality is the majority of Americans aren't with us when it comes to IVF and the pro-life movement. And majority of pro-lifers, I would say, judging from the comment section, don't even understand this issue fully, especially our evangelical brothers and sisters where the church is relatively silent. I mean, that's one of our biggest, and should be one of your biggest takeaways, is we need to talk about this more, and we need to challenge pastors and priests to talk about this more. This was a huge win, this Alabama Supreme Court decision, because it acknowledged what we've been saying all along, that humans in the embryonic form are in fact humans and are special and should have human rights. But like I said, it was a huge wasted opportunity. So now President Trump is in office. Fast forward to a year later, President Trump's in office. We all know that Elon Musk, who is his right-hand guy apparently, is very pro making babies, not so much pro being a dad. It sounds like it's kind of scary, but problems there, and there's a lot of problems there. But we know Elon has said, publicly that the greatest threat he thinks civilization faces is depopulation. So I think he and others are encouraging the president, we can increase the population. We can promote families by promoting IVF. Human life must be protected at the moment it is created. It comes into existence. That is conception. President Trump needs to stop immediately and at least study the IVF industry, because I guarantee you, if he studied it, he would be singing a different tune, but he would have to know all the facts. And here are the facts. The IVF industry preys on desperate families. Remember, it's extremely expensive and painful to go through rounds of IVF. They prey upon desperate families. No one ever talks about the fact that there's actually holistic, ethical methods that are just as effective or sometimes even more effective than IVF to actually cure and treat infertility that don't cost tens of thousands of dollars. No one talks about that. Why? Because there's no industry. There's no profit margin. The other fact is IVF industry kills humans in the embryonic stage, just like early abortions do. Humans die. And the third fact is IVF promotes eugenics. It absolutely promotes eugenics. My children who have cystic fibrosis, for example, I'm in a lot of Facebook chat rooms with families and mothers of children with cystic fibrosis, different types of chat and rooms and groups. And there's specific groups set up for CF parents who use IVF, and the rest of us are excluded. Trust me, I try to get in and I get blocked because CF parents, once you have a child with cystic fibrosis, the geneticist on the CF team, cystic fibrosis team, will come in and try to encourage you to use IVF. The abortion rate for children who are diagnosed in the womb with CF is actually higher than children with Down syndrome. And so what they're trying to do is eliminate children who have cystic fibrosis by encouraging couples that are carriers, like my husband and I are both carriers for CF or recessive carriers, to use IVF, because then what they do is they do screening and they will screen out all the humans who have cystic fibrosis. The screening means the human is either discarded and killed or donated for research to a university who will then be experimented upon and then killed. 100% straight eugenics. If you've ever watched, and if you haven't watched, I encourage you to get it. It's an Ethan Hawke, Jude Law movie from the late 90s called Gattaca. Everything wrong with the IVF industry is in this movie because the movie, I don't want to give away too much of details, but there's a guy who wants to go to space and he can't go to space because he was conceived the natural way. And so he's not a superhuman like everybody else who was conceived in a lab. That's the movie. And it's about his struggle as a non-IVF conceived superhuman and how he's a second-class citizen because that society embraced this creation of humans as the way to create superhumans and to root out all diseases and unhealthy genetic abnormalities. Let's talk about a shocking story that came out right after President Trump signed the EO. This story, I mean, I was having friends, family sending this to me on the Washington Post. So Christina Murray went to an IVF clinic to create a child with her own egg and the sperm of a donor who looked like her. White, dirty blonde hair, blue eyes. That's what she wanted. She did successfully get pregnant, gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. But there was apparent immediately after birth that the child who had been implanted in her womb was not her biological child. How would she know this? Because the child had dark skin. She carried and birthed the child of two Black parents who had also used this IVF clinic, who then later sued for custody of their child that Christina had raised as an infant. She took the baby to doctor's appointments. She nursed him. She raised him as her own child. And then one day the court said, you know what? You're right. That is biologically your child. You owned him in the IVF clinic. Therefore, he is yours. Because IVF removes the process of conception from sex into a laboratory, biological parents are viewed as the owners, legal owners of their genetic material, aka their children. Can you see what's wrong here? I mean, I don't think I have to spell it out. Even if a child has bonded with the mother who carried him in her womb from the beginning of his life, well into his infancy, he is considered the property of his biological parents, in this case of Christina, found herself in. She now deals with the emotional trauma of the mix-up, being separated from her child, and she doesn't know if another child has had her biological child. And obviously, this baby is going to suffer long-term effects from being ripped from the only mother he's ever known. Now, there are two main reasons that we all know that women choose to undergo, families choose to undergo IVF. The first one is the worst, right? Infertility. The second one is sick. It's the desire for a designer baby. Infertility can be caused by many physical conditions that prevent a couple from conceive or being able to remain pregnant. Sometimes, and what we've seen, there was a book written, I think in the early 80s called Motherhood Deferred. Other times, her fertile years have simply run out because she waited too long to have a family. This is a common problem. It's actually getting worse because as we're seeing, people in their 20s saying they're not even interested in dating. Then they're waiting till maybe their 30s to start dating. And then it's their 40s when they want to have children. Ladies, that's not your biological time. Early 20s to maybe mid 30s is the best time, the best chance you have at achieving pregnancy and having healthy pregnancies. You wait after that and you're going to have problems. It just doesn't make sense. Our culture has to do a better job at educating girls about their bodies and teaching them the importance of having children during the most fertile years. It's not bad to get pregnant in your 20s. I remember I got pregnant with our first son at 23, and I was a little advanced. I graduated college at 19. So I was a couple years ahead of everybody because of skipped grades in schools. But still, even if I would have gone through 4 years of high school and 4 years of college, I've been 25. And you wouldn't believe the looks that I got from people, even within the pro-life movement. It's crazy. We need to encourage young women to have children. And for the women who are unable to conceive for a physical reason like PCOS or endometriosis, they also need to be educated that IVF doesn't cure them of those conditions. It circumvents them, attempts to create a child in the most unnatural way possible. But women deserve real treatment. And actual real treatment does exist. NAPRO technology, I'm going to put this link in the show notes, fertilitycare.org/NAPRO, N-A-PRO, P-R-O technology. NAPRO technology is a great resource to check out to learn about how your body works and how to locate a doctor who's committed to treating the underlying medical conditions that are causing infertility rather just than throwing you birth control pills and make you infertile, by the way, and IVF and just sending people on their way with no real treatment. I can't tell you how many couples I know, Christian couples who struggle with infertility, were told to use IVF and found a NAPRO doctor who were able to conceive. No ethical dilemma needed. No tens of thousands of dollars needed to be spent. However, we also have to be aware it's not just infertility driving women to IVF clinics. Some women use IVF because they want an option of creating a designer baby. Oh, Kristen, no one does that. Yes, they do. This is a very scary form of eugenics where humans are conceived in a lab and then screened based off of their genetics. So, like I said, children with Down syndrome, children with cystic fibrosis, screened out, imperfect babies, thrown out, discarded, killed in an act of pure ableism. Other women are using the screening to pick the gender of their baby. It's called gendercide when you do it for abortion. This is more common you think because, once again, the United States is literally the wild, wild west when it comes to IVF. Even corrupt, immoral countries like the UK and Australia, which pro-lifers don't even have freedom of speech in, even those countries have said, you know what, in IVF, you can only create this many human beings. And you have to implant all of them, or you have to plant the majority of them. And you can't just choose babies based on their sex, because that sounds bad, as it really is. But this happens. Chrissy Teigen bragged several years ago when she was pregnant with her second child that she picked specifically a girl embryo. Quote, she told People magazine, I made this decision. Not only am I having a girl, but I picked the little girl from her embryo. I picked her and was like, let's put in the girl. First of all, you don't pick the little girl from her little embryo. You did not hatch from an embryo. I mean, I don't know why we trust Hollywood people. They're so stupid. That was her in embryonic form. It's, basic pro-life apologetics. But there's also a story I'm bringing up here, once again, on People, of Paris Hilton. This came out during COVID. She talked about how COVID happened and the world was shut down. So I was like, what do you think about what do you think about us making embryos? Is what she told her husband. And he said, yeah, let's do it. Children are embryos are your children. They're not just like pre-humans. That's how this is how people refer to these children, as they're like pre-humans. Like an embryo isn't a real baby. No, it really is. It's a baby. It's a human. She said, I've done it 7 times. I have all boys. I have 20 boys. I just went through the process a month ago, so I'm like waiting to see the results if there's any girls. Yep, that's eugenics right there. There's also efforts underway to perfect the art of gene editing. This actually involves using a tool called CRISPR to target and remove undesirable genes. I'm pretty well schooled about CRISPR because that is where the potential cure for cystic fibrosis will come. Obviously, people who have cystic fibrosis and have organ damage, that will never be fixed. But the goal is to deliver a gene editing tool via a virus to a person with CF that will actually correct the genetic defect. They just started testing in the UK. That's coming. That's a good thing, right? But they're trying to use CRISPR to edit human beings before they're even born. There could be a lot of bad things coming out of this. So President Trump, he needs to understand all of this extremely lucrative, morally corrupt industry before creating a policy that's going to drastically expand and lead to the deaths of millions more children. Instead, I think he should, he could achieve the same goal of family creation and actually help fund the treatment of fertility problems that are plaguing American women, because a lot of times because of IVF, because they've used IUDs, because of delayed motherhood. We could actually fund the treatment of fertility problems and the expansion of ethical methods like NAPRO technology, subsidize access to true women's health care. Just an idea. Call me. I'm ready. I'm right here, buddy. All right, next topic. Recently, I talked about the drop in the maternal mortality in the United States since the Dobbs decision. Great news. Woo! And I showed in that show how the establishment media has lied to women and tried to scare them into opposing pro-life laws, saying, your life, your health is at risk if these pro-life laws are passed. That was actually the exact opposite. Well, guess what? I know you're probably not surprised because you're smart people. You tuned into my show. They're doing it again. This time, the data they're wringing their hands over is infant mortality stats. The story centers on a new analysis from JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association. It's very well known. My friend Dr. Michael New, who teaches at Catholic University of America, who makes it his job to report on any bogus study out there is about abortion, wrote in National Review this. He said, quote, "The study analyzed the impact of 14 state-level pro-life laws either effectively banned abortion or protected preborn children after 6 weeks gestation when their heartbeats could be heard. It's considered state-level infant mortality data from 2012 to 2023. Okay, that's the premise. Now, in the study, we found that the infant mortality rate increased in 2022. That's the year the Dobbs decision came down, but then declined the year after in 2023. And the study didn't look at the 2024 data, which is available, which actually continues the decline. The 2023 data said that the infant mortality decline was actually similar in both pro-life states and pro-abortion states. So I don't know how they're making this to sound like pro-life laws are leading to more infants to die, which, by the way, if you're for abortion, why do you care that more infants are dying? Because literally that's what you're advocating for. It's interesting, I think, to note, though, the causes, even though infant mortality is down, the causes, and they're like complete liars because they were using a high number for 2022, which Dobbs came down in June to pro-life laws. Most of them didn't go effect till later that summer. So the 2023 data would be the real actual data analyzed, and that went down. So that whole headline is wrong. But it is interesting to note that the causes of infant death have changed in some cases. 5 strongly pro-life states in these laws saw a larger increase in congenital deaths, meaning that the pro-life laws in those states prevented children with a adverse prenatal diagnosis from being aborted. People act like that's a bad thing. That's a good thing. While we have IVF targeting and destroying humans in embryonic form who have undesirable traits from ever being allowed to enter their mother's wombs, pro-life laws are affording these children the dignity of being carried to term and being held in their mother's arms. That's a good thing. We're not killing them in the womb. We're letting them be born. And if they don't survive, we love these children. We love these children. And all they ever know their whole life is love. They never know the sharp grasp of an abortionist's sofa clamp. Even if a child's life is short, this gives parents closure of saying goodbye to their child, gives the child a burial and a memorial that every human being deserves. For many years, pro-life legislators would often say that they had to make like an exception to the pro-life laws that allowed children conceived in rape and children diagnosed prenatally with abnormalities to be aborted, even if all their children were protected. I said for years that these protections were and are discriminatory and out of line with our principles as pro-lifers. And I understand that some pro-lifers felt that they couldn't protect all children from abortion if they didn't make exceptions because of the reality of trying to win votes. But I'm so happy to say that the misguided status quo has changed and that there are now more modern pro-life laws that don't make exceptions for certain children to be aborted. And Students for Life of America is on the leading edge of that. Our student leaders who are the ones lobbying against rape exceptions in Kentucky and West Virginia just this month. We are the leading voice literally the only leading voice in the pro-life movement, making sure that there aren't these exceptions for children based on the circumstances of their conception, based on their genetic code. I wish all these children being born and all of these lives that are being saved right now could be celebrated by everyone. But sadly, the abortion industry wants more thing, and that's more death. It's actually really creepy. And we're seeing it across the ranks. They're so desperate to be able to show that pro-life laws are bad for women and children's health that they're just like failing miserably here. What we've been saying for decades is that killing children in the womb doesn't solve any problems or treat any conditions. Now we've been proven right, and they cannot hide. No matter how many misleading establishment media headlines they've released, it doesn't actually change the facts. Pro-life laws don't increase maternal mortality. They don't increase infant mortality. Pro-life laws are a good thing. They save lives, period. Next, I want to talk about President Trump's Secretary of Labor nominee. President Trump has shocked the world, I would say, with how prepared he has come to office and how fast he's ready to act. There was a podcast that referred President Trump's first term as a pop quiz, second term as a take-home test. He got the assignment and he came ready for the test, right? So many good things have happened in the pro-life movement. In fact, it continues to make me angry when I think about how many pro-lifers simply refuse to vote and sit out this election, or still say that they hate Republicans and are going to vote for Republicans. Now, do Republicans piss me off more than anybody else? Absolutely, because I expect more of them. However, how can you say you just don't vote when clearly we knew what we were going to get with Kamala Harris, which was going to be, a complete attempt to shut down and silence the pro-life movement, like literally end our free speech rights, which we're seeing happen in Scotland, in the UK, versus what we have now. Don't get me started. Well, maybe, but not right now. All right. But President Trump, beyond the EO, which was a really bad call with IVF, and we're hoping we can moderate or fix it as much as we can, persuade President Trump. That's what I'm talking to you about, because you can talk to him via social media, and he actually does listen. The other bad Trump thing he's done recently is appointed Lori Chavez DeRemer as his Secretary of Labor nominee. She was a member of the House of Representatives. She's a pretty bad candidate for this job. In fact, she has a C on Students for Life America's pro-life report card. So this is our legislative report card in Congress. Unlike some of our other groups that I'm friends with, we do not just give people A's for being Republican. Like, you actually have to vote and sponsor legislation. We're kind of mean. In fact, we gave Speaker Johnson not an A+ last year, and I think he was really mad, but he didn't sponsor bills because, speakers don't typically sponsor bills, but sorry. I don't know. But anyway, I love you, Speaker Johnson, but, step it up. Okay, so she got the C, which is pretty, that's like the worst grade any Republican got. I don't think any Republican got lower than a C. She also once worked for Planned Parenthood. And, I have friends who used to work for Planned Parenthood. So we're not against anybody changing their minds, but she's never really shown that she regrets her time working at Planned Parenthood. That's the scary thing. So we've been calling, Students for Life Action is the only national pro-life group, has been calling for President Trump to select a better appointment for the Secretary of Labor. And I know people are like, why does this matter? It's Secretary of Labor. It's not like she's going to be working in the Department of Health and Human Services. This is a kind of a big deal, though, because what we saw with the executive order from the Biden administration, which was the interagency task force on abortion after Dobbs, where the Biden administration literally told all the federal government to find all the ways to fund and promote abortion, bad things happened at the Department of Labor. Laws like FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, and ADA, the American Disabilities Act, can actually be used, if they wanted to force abortion policies in the workplace. And this is what happened after Dobbs. The U.S. Department of Labor's Women's Bureau actually came out and said, quote, the U.S. Department of Labor's Women's Bureau is the only federal agency authorized by Congress to represent the needs and interests of working women. Oh boy. As such, the Women's Bureau is uniquely positioned to safeguard the needs of working women, advocate for their equality, which includes access to safe reproductive health options such as abortion, contraception, and comprehensive maternity care, end quote. I don't know about you, but I kind of find it creepy when federal bureaucrats think that working women need abortion in order to be equal. It's actually pretty gross and misogynistic. I'm a working mom and I don't need to kill my children to balance my life. Sometimes I do have to yell at them and put, my phone call on mute and yell at them, but I don't have to kill my children to succeed in the workplace. There is nothing truly pro-woman about supporting abortion as part of a normal career cycle for women. All right, last topic for today. We need to talk about the New York Times, good mainstream media news. There was a shocking piece out of the New York Times recently where they're starting to turn on their buddies at Planned Parenthood. The piece is entitled Botched Care and Tired Staff, Planned Parenthood Crisis. Now, there's always been a crisis at Planned Parenthood because they kill hundreds of thousands of babies every single year by being funded with nearly $700 million of taxpayer funds. But the New York Times' Katie Benner has revealed that as efforts have been ramping up, others, to defund Planned Parenthood of federal taxpayer dollars at the executive, judicial, and the legislative branch, the organization is internally in shambles. Benner describes Planned Parenthood as an organization whose non-abortion health offerings have been shrinking for years, and Planned Parenthood's annual reports back them up. In fact, every single pro-life movement group in the movement has been saying this for years. Here's a short summary of what she wrote. Planned Parenthood's healthcare operation has shrunk from a high of 5 million patients served across 900 clinics in the 1990s to 2.1 million patients and 600 clinics today, with staff members complaining that patient care is compromised by low salaries, chronic understaffing, high turnover, inadequate training, aging facilities. Yep. We've known this to be real forever. I've gone inside of Planned Parenthoods. Planned Parenthoods are kind of shitty if you've ever been in one. Go to the Trenton, New Jersey Planned Parenthood and see if that's a place you want to go. That's why women love coming into pregnancy centers who've gone to abortion facilities, and they'll say, as soon as they enter a pregnancy center, wow, I feel loved. I love it. It's so welcoming here, so joyful, so peaceful, because they've actually been to these clinics and they're dirty and they're nasty and they're negative. They're not happy. It's not a place you want to go. It's interesting why the New York Times would write this piece. I think a lot of people, including myself, are like, well, why would they write it? I think they probably wrote it to gin up some public support for Planned Parenthood. Like, oh, all these employees are complaining to New York Times, are underpaid, and there's high turnover. I don't know. Maybe I hope it's maybe the mainstream media is finally wising up, because the article goes into talking about the distinction between Planned Parenthood National, which raises all the money, gets all the publicity, does all the political work, versus the affiliates, the clinics, who all say they're operating in a deficit. This is why defunding Planned Parenthood is really important, because, some people, I talked about them last week on my podcast, I'm not going to mention their name, but some people will say that the pro-life movement's a bunch of liars and frauds because we just want to defund Planned Parenthood, and that doesn't really end abortion. Well, defunding Planned Parenthood would end abortion. It's not going to end all their abortions because they're a $2 billion industry. However, it's going to force them to have to turn a profit at their facilities and stop operating their facilities in the fiscal red, which we know most of their facilities are operating in the fiscal red. No facilities, no abortion. So the whole attack the supply and demand of abortion, this would be attacking the supply part. They actually reported that in this New York Times article that the affiliates across the country are cutting services, including late-term abortions in New York City. Yay. They also talked about in this article these horrific standards of care, which is ironic for a group that calls themselves Care No Matter What. But some of the things are really bad. So, quote, Planned Parenthood has been accused of improperly implanting a birth control device and causing nerve damage, inserting an IUD in a woman who was 4 months pregnant, and failing to upload sexually transmitted infection disease, they say infection at the left, it's disease, test results in the charts, leading patients to wrongly believe the results were negative. The failure to actually put STD results in the system in North Carolina Planned Parenthood wasn't just a one-off mistake. Nursing staff simply ignored their job, their responsibility of uploading these test results for months. You can't just say that's because somebody's understaffed. That is a culture of negligence right there. I mean, people are having sex thinking they're clean with others. Some of them may be life-threatening sexual diseases, and they didn't even know they were actually infected. That's why this ridiculous motto of Care No Matter What needs to be scrubbed from their website. They put an IUD in a mother who's pregnant. How would you do that? How can you be that stupid? She delivered a stillborn baby several hours after the Planned Parenthood did that to her. In the clinic in Omaha, the staff were saying that patients were vomiting from the stench of toilets that were backed up for 2 days. More from the New York Times. Quote, employees at various affiliates said it was common to run out of over-the-counter pain medicine and IV flushes. Salaries are so low that it's not unusual for staff members to qualify for Medicaid and federal food assistance. Turnover is hovering around 50% a year, in parts of the country, and clinic workers complained that they were learning from inexperienced peers. More than a dozen said they did not receive adequate training for patient intake, blood draws, and our tasks. Then I talked to 50 employees, so more than a fifth said that they received inadequate training. All this is happening, and this was part of the New York Times expose, is that because the affiliates believe the big bosses in Washington and New York City care more about advancing abortion policy and electing abortion promoting politicians than actually care. They said there's been pressure to double the number of patients and see more than 4 patients an hour. This is crazy. I mean, it's not surprising, though, because Planned Parenthood was founded by an organization by an evil woman, Margaret Sanger, who didn't even try to hide her hatred for humanity, who literally called it, quote, a sin to bring children into the world, and wanted to eradicate entire groups of people based on their skin color, the number of dollars in their bank account, their IQ level, what country they immigrated from. Let's watch this.
Do you believe in sin? When I say believe, I don't mean believe in committing sin. Do you believe there is such a thing as sin?
Well, I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born. That, to me, is the greatest sin that people can commit.
But sin in the ordinary sense that we regard it, do you believe or do you not believe?
Well, what would they be?
Do you believe that infidelity is a sin?
Well, I'm not going to specify what I think is sin. I've stated what I think is the worst sin.
Yes, but then you asked me to say what, and I said what, and you refused to answer me?
Yes, I don't know about infidelity. It has so many personalities to it, and what a person's own belief is. I couldn't generalize any of those things.
The worst sin. That's the worst sin you commit, not like killing human beings. The worst sin is you could bring into the world a child who has cystic fibrosis or Down syndrome. It's hard not to take that one personal. I've actually heard that in chat rooms of people and students will say it is selfish to continue to have children. Why my husband and I, why would we continue to have kids after we knew Gunnar had cystic fibrosis, after our first child has CF? Because that was just selfish and sinful to bring into world our daughter Gracie, who has also cystic fibrosis. So I, for one, can't wait to see Planned Parenthood get defunded and tell them to go fund themselves. And I can't wait to see President Trump tweet that out. I might just retire. I'd never get the haters, all that. But America and the world will be a much better place once Planned Parenthood and Margaret Sanger's legacy are thrown into the ash heap of history, right where it belongs, right on top of the Roe v. Wade decision. Hey, Pro-Life Jen, the application process for Students for Life America's National Leaders Collective is now open. The National Leaders Collective prepares the pro-life generation's top student leaders to lead in careers and volunteer activism that will transform the pro-life movement in college, high school, and well beyond. If you are a pro-life activist in a Students for Life group looking to pursue a pro-life career, this program is for you. I literally created it for you in mind. We have 8 unique year-long opportunities, fellowships. They're each focused on turning leaders with specific talents and passions into lifelong pro-life activists. As a member of the National Leaders Collective, you'll receive a free trip to Washington, D.C. this June for kickoff weekend at the National Leaders Collective, where you'll even be able to participate at the National Celebrate Life weekend, mentorship from a leader in the pro-life movement all year, monthly or bi-monthly training calls with other pro-life student leaders like you, and free resources and opportunities to continue your pro-life career. I have seen some incredible leaders go through this program over the years and now lead in national pro-life groups, such as Live Action, Pro-Love Ministries, Alliance Defending Freedom, Secular Pro-Life, Justice for All, and even here at Students for Life America, and many more, some that have been literally started by alumni. Applications are open through Thursday, March 6th, so visit studentsforlife.org/leadership to learn more and apply. Hope to see you in DC in June. I want to thank you all for joining me for today's episode of The Kristen Hawkins Show. Make sure you subscribe and follow along for more discussions like this. To hear from me daily, you'll get just one pro-life news clip every day, something I think you need to know, you need to be talking about or thinking about. You can join my personal text line. You can text the word Kristen, spell my name right, to 53445. Until next week, keep speaking up for the voiceless and stand for life.